Today's reading is from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentary on the Bible in Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. This week's reading is Self-Reliance versus Self-Reliance. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Last week we considered the need for attunement with God, with the gurus, and with the wisdom of others until we make that wisdom our own. There is a strong and in fact valid belief nowadays in the need for standing on one's own feet rather than depending weakly on others to carry us by their strength. Swami Kriyananda was once asked, "What is the best yoga posture?" "That one," he replied, "which sets you squarely on your own 2 feet." Our strength must come from within. If that strength comes from the ego, however, instead of from soul consciousness, it is like a guitar string without its sounding board. The notes it emits will be thin and feeble. Our strength must come from within, but must be coupled with the recognition of our inner link with broader and higher realities. The Bhagavad Gita says in the 10th chapter, "Everyone in this world whose life is glorious or prosperous or powerful, know that his achievement is but a little spark from the great sun of my effulgence." Jesus, in talking to his disciples, emphasized also the power of attunement with his own consciousness as a ray of the divine. For this ray had descended already through him in response to their devotion. It was a sign that God was already listening to them with receptive attention and did not require to be wooed in that way any longer. In the passage preceding the one we read last week, Jesus said, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. And every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. Now ye are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine, no more can ye, except ye abide in me." This was the meaning of Paramahansa Yogananda's counsel also, when speaking more intimately to the disciples of the need for attunement with him. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Oh, oh, oh.
Good morning, everybody. I look at those flowers this morning and I remember this word that Bruce just read in the reading, effulgence. I thought, wow, effulgence. I don't know why, it just kind of seemed to hit me that way. They're beautiful. So this topic is one of my favorite ones. Of course, they all are wonderful, but for some reason this one in particular I really resonate with, I guess because I was brought up being told that, I was brought up in a strict New England family, and you just did it on your own. I mean, you just didn't rely on your neighbors. You didn't call on your neighbors. You didn't see your neighbors. You did it. And so it was kind of very refreshing when I finally got on the spiritual path. And, it's really just so much bigger than that. This self-reliance versus self-reliance. What are we talking about here? We're talking about the little self-reliance on our ego self, which is what we know as who we are, we think, And we're talking about that versus self-reliant with capital letters. Reliant on the bigger self, reliant on that higher power, the source of all that is. And isn't it wonderful that that is the spiritual journey? That, we don't have to have just our little ego self be it for who knows how long, many more incarnations that, we're going to be coming back. Billions? Yogananda, our spiritual teacher, said, our guru said, millions of lifetimes maybe we keep coming back. Doesn't matter, because what we're here for is to find that truth. The truth being for everybody that God is the doer, that God is in charge, that God is the only reality. And it's what the yogic teachings tell us. And those of you who are following the path of self-realization here, these yogic teachings are all about giving us tools and techniques and inspiring examples and everything that helps us to move from that belief that we are the little ego, that this is me, and with all my wonderful traits, but with all those ones that aren't, that we all have, because we tend to be quite hard on ourselves, and we tend to see a lot of the things that we don't like. And so it's wonderful to know that, truly we are going towards that soul nature, oneness in God. And we are going towards what the great saints and sages throughout all ages and all disciplines have not only told us, but they've shown us by their example that, this isn't our true reality. This is only a school, and we're here to learn how to take those steps to move into that higher presence. A little example I can give you of relying on the egoic self. It's about a gambler who he had this dream, and he dreamed all about the letters 5. And so he when he woke up, he thought, gee, I wonder if that's an omen or something. And so he called his bookie there in the horse racing business and found out that sure enough in the 5th race, that the horse in the 5th place was called 5th Avenue. And anyway, he thought, maybe there's something to this, and so he put $555.55 down on that horse. And he decided all day he would, just work with that's number 5. So he took a 5-minute shower, and he took his dog around the block 5 times, and he ate 5 bowls of cereal, and he spent the day behaving that way. And he ended up going to the racetrack at 5 in the evening, and he managed to buy 5 programs, and then he went and sat in the 5th seat in the 5th row, and he'd even brought 5 pairs of binoculars just in case. So when it came to the 5th race, sure enough, there was his 4th in the 5th position. There it was, 5th Avenue, this is it. Boy, this is, this ego is really telling me something here. And anyway, the race proceeded, and sure enough, the horse came in 5th. So, so much for relying on this little ego self with all its bright ideas and its little sparky intuitions that are kind of quirky and whatever else it is. I mean, we do, don't we? We get off on these tangents sometime, and the ego will take us way over here, and then we get batted back, and no, that's not right, and we come back. And, we're always looking for that which will make us happy. I guess he thought, winning the money was going to make him happy. Of course, he didn't, so it made him pretty unhappy. So that's kind of what we do with our life. We get batted back and forth. And it's so interesting because Americans, we just celebrated the 4th of July, and this is freedom. And I know I'm from New Hampshire, and their motto on their license plate, would you believe, is live free or die. That's it. It's been that way for years. And, I never used to think much about it, but now I thought, live free. Yes, live free in terms of, not being taken over by other countries. I know there's that mental concept, which of course is very valid, but We're talking about, what really is freedom. And we're talking about the true freedom, which is the freedom that comes from within. I know Swami Kriyananda, our teacher, who lived at Mount Washington with our guru, Yogananda, for the last years of his life. He was in charge of the monks at that time, and one of the monks had told him that, he said, I can't give Master, my guru, Yogananda, my unconditional obedience, because he said, I would lose my own free will then. And when Swami related this to Yogananda, Yogananda just shook his head and he said, how can he be free when he is bound up by his whims, he's bound up by his habits, he's bound up by his desires? We think we're free, we're making choices all the time, but we're conditioned. We're brought up with certain things that our parents told us, and then our friends, their beliefs and likes and dislikes, and we're raised in a culture where certain things are, good and bad, and it goes on and on. And this is just this one lifetime. We come with all the other habits and likes and dislikes from past. They don't go away. And so, are we really free? We're choosing based on all that conditioning that we have. I like to tell people I like to climb mountains, and I love to, I'm not happy if I'm going uphill, and really putting out some energy. And then other people go, oh, that sounds terrible. What you might think is wonderful, someone else might think is awful, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Are we free to make those our free choices? We are within the limits of our conditioning. But as Yogananda said, you're only free when you tune into God's will. That's when the true freedom comes. Because as you release the egoic shackles that you have, then you can tune into that reality that's there. It's not clouded over by all your preconceived ideas and notions. You can perceive God's presence. And isn't that what we want? For God is stillness. And in that stillness, he is unconditional love. He is ever-new joy. He is peace eternal. Things that we can imagine, things that we want desperately, but until we learn how to come back to that point of stillness within ourselves and tune into it, we can't really know it. And so the teachings help us on this journey to find that out. So standing on our own 2 feet does not mean just doing what our ego is telling us. Standing on our own 2 feet means having the courage and the attunement to follow God's will. And that takes a great deal of effort. We're not saying this is easy, but the masters will help you when you open up to wanting to do this, and when you're really sincere that this is what you want. You'll find their energy helping you along the way. I know a shining example of someone who did that in a very short period of time. Those of you who are on this path know, Rajarsi Janakananda, also known as Saint Lin, was Yogananda's foremost disciple. And within a short period of time, he had achieved what we're all looking for, which is that oneness in spirit, self-realization. And Yogananda called him Saint Lin. And yet it was so interesting. When they would get together, he and his disciple, Yogananda disciple, would get together, he would frequently say, Rajarsi, remember where your power comes from? And Rajarsi would say, oh yes, Master, I know, it all comes from you. He had no ego, and that's why he was a saint. He was able to let go of that and know that God was the doer. He was a businessman. He was an empire of wealth and power and authority. And yet, as he said, God's the doer. He says, I'm not doing this. And he just allowed that to happen. And so he could. The more we let God take over our lives, the more that we can express that true reality within us. The greater our success, the greater our magnetism, the greater whatever it is that we are to express in this lifetime, depending on God's will. We might not even really know what it is. I know I didn't. When I graduated from college, I had no idea. It's like, what am I supposed to do? I kind of bounced around all these things, you know. But as we start to understand that, you know, it's really not us. It's tuning into what is trying to happen through us. A good analogy that I came upon in my readings was picture you're on a sailboat, and you're in this vast ocean, but there's no sails. The sails are kind of lying flat on the deck, and there's a wind blowing, and the wind is God's consciousness, it's God's power, and yet here you are without any sails, and so your boat is just being battered around in this ocean, and you're on the boat, and that's kind of the way most of us live our lives. You know, we're rudderless, powerless. We just kind of get battered along depending upon the karma that we've brought into this life. You know, we do this and that and react again. And it's sometimes we're up, you know, it's great. Sometimes we aren't, because life is it's an up and a down process. But you know, as we begin to want to participate with this journey that we're on, then we can start to raise our sails. It takes a lot of effort, but we begin to participate in the journey. And as we raise those sails, it begins to catch the wind, doesn't it? And as we start to catch the wind, we've got God's power and that presence that begins to help us along on our journey. It allows us to, again, increase what it is, that effort to raise our sails. What's raising the sails? Well, it's all those things that we are taught we have to do. It's making right choices in life. It's making things, lifting up our consciousness. You know what it is. You know when you want to just veg out and let the consciousness sink down, and you know when you're not really participating. And we all have to take little breaks like that. But we need to consciously lift our consciousness. It takes a great deal of effort. And yet that effort is rewarded 1,000-time fold as we do it with attunement, the best attunement that we can get to God and Guru. Pray unceasingly if you can. All these techniques that we've learned are really, really helpful, because the more we become an instrument for God, the more we get to accomplish, and the more satisfaction and joy we really truly find in our lives, whatever that is that we're being asked to do. I know I look back years and years ago, and there was just a handful of us with our little meditation group, and then when we finally got some ministers up here, we were still really small and struggling every step of the way, and it just came into the awareness that we really needed something more to help us to grow. It was like if you wanted to really grow on the spiritual path, you had to move down to our main center in Ananda Village in Nevada City, California, because they had the energy, they had jobs, they had ways in which we could serve. And some of us had families and we couldn't just up and move. And it was an awareness we had to do something. And I'll always remember marvel at what happened. I guess it's just totally a miracle because that's what it had to be. Because here there were three of us. There was a bookkeeper, and then there was a graphic designer, and then there was a school teacher, an elementary school teacher. And here we were, just suddenly feeling the calling to start this bookstore. And, none of us had had more than 2 or 3, maybe 4 years at most on the spiritual path. And here we were going to be business people and book people and who knows what else, salespeople. I mean, it's a miracle, We couldn't have done that on our own little egos. It just isn't going to happen. And I just remember as we were really getting into this, being so totally afraid, just the fear of what it is that we were trying to do, and knowing that we didn't know what we were doing, we didn't know. And just saying to God, okay, I can't do this, we can't do this. You are going to have to take over and do this. You are the doer. And now it sounds pretty common because we're used to it, but back then, those types of things were new concepts. It's like, what is this? God's the doer? But yes, it felt so right. God's the doer. And, it was like jumping into this huge, raging river. I always remember the feeling. Leave all the familiar, all the comfort, everything behind, and just jump into this river and swim with all your might. And that's what we did. Together we swam with all our might, just doing whatever was next. I mean, what was the plan? Who knows what the plan was, except we just were going to survive. We were going to make it happen. And so we just did what was next. And things came to us. People came to us to help us. Resources came to help us. It just worked. And I mean, it's a miracle. Ananda is a miracle. Because we started with teepees, people in teepees, and no money, and just a faith that this was right, and to do the next step. And we're still doing it. We're still doing it in all aspects. And it's the best way to gain the experience for what we're talking about, to begin to rely on that divine consciousness in your life, to just do what feels right. Of course, we meditate, we do the practices, but we have to take it out into our everyday life and use it with our relationships and whatever we do. And if you can always remember to bring it to the highest octave, whatever is happening in your life, what is the highest and best way that you can behave? How can you be the most kind? How can you be the most helpful? How can you help others in whatever way they need? How can you be compassionate in the best way you can? How can you serve in the best way? Well, you just take those qualities and you come at it with the very best you can do and give it to God. And those sails keep going up. And you keep reeling those sails up. And the wind keeps catching those sails. It keeps blowing you along. And that joy starts to come through to the degree that, that's the reality. You begin to really know it. You're not just affirming it. You know it because it's working in your own life. How can we cultivate this knowing? Well, I kind of talked a little bit about that, meditate. But, one thing I want to emphasize is one little technique that we teach in our Learn to Meditate class, which sometimes gets forgotten. It's our Hong Sa technique. And that technique you can do not only just sitting in meditation, but you can take it out into other aspects, such as with driving your car in traffic jams. Rather than getting mad or listening to some awful music, you can listen to nice music, but you could also do Hong Sa. And you can do it as quietly as you want inside. Don't close your eyes. But, it helps to bring the energy up to the point between the eyebrows. And the more we can keep our energy up there, the more helpful it is in keeping us to make those right decisions in our life. Because it really is a process of every single minute of your life. And because that is the only path there is. It's the only way we're going to get there, is to do the work ourselves. But just know it's not a thankless job. We are getting help as our sails go bigger and bigger. Another wonderful story that I thought I'd tell quickly here is, this is one that I heard quite a while ago, but it's one that Joe Tish, was passed on, the spiritual director of Ananda was passed to Joe Tish when Swami Kriyananda passed on. And he told this story. He said he and Vidura, who happens to, at that time was the general manager of Ananda Village, were on a big ship. Again, a boat, interesting analogy. And Swami Kriyananda was on the deck, and he was just simply being calm and sipping some tea and just enjoying everything. And a lot of the devotees were scurrying around the deck, helping out and serving. And then suddenly this big storm came up, and the waves started to lash the boat, and it was tipping, and devotees were falling off, and devotees were jumping off, and devotees were hanging on for dear life. And Jyotish and Vidura were hanging on to that steering wheel of the ship, for dear life, trying to keep it upright and make it go where it's supposed to go. And they looked over and saw Swami Kriyananda, and there he was, sitting in his deck chair, just sipping his tea and being really calm and just like, oh, this is lovely. And they just couldn't believe it. And suddenly in the dream, the waters parted, and Joe just saw that, oh my gosh, this boat they were on was connected with this long rod to a track down below, and the track was running along the bottom of the ocean. And they had come from somewhere, and they were obviously going somewhere, but they were on the track. And so, he said, what a revelation, we think we're steering our boat, but the more that we can tune into God's presence, God is really steering our boat for us. And it makes it a whole lot easier. So when we go through those violent storms of our life, because we will be tested, and that does mean that we will have trials, they will come. And so when we go through those trials, small ones, but especially those big ones, just know that God is there right with you. God is steering your boat. And, whatever he's giving you is what you need at that moment in your life to take you to your next step. It's how you react, how you handle what it is that's going on in your life. If you can take it beyond the normal reactive process, the ego process that we've been conditioned to, and just say, no, I'm going to step aside and just try to see it from that higher perspective and just try to get God's help. Give it to God. This is what you want us to do now, Lord. What can I do? Help me. It's when you do that you grow the most. It's when we begin to find that power within us. We find that love, unconditional love within us. All those things that we yearn for are right there. We just have to put our egos aside. And it doesn't mean you have to go through and cut away everything. If you lift your consciousness enough and keep it up there, then those things that you need to get rid of start to fall aside. They start to go away because they're not really a part of you anyway. They're not a part of that higher self. As we know, when you go into a beautiful church that has all those beautiful stained glass windows, when it's dark outside, you don't really notice the beauty coming that the windows are manifesting. But when that light shines through the windows, there's that beauty. And that's the same with us. There's that beauty of God within us, shining, trying to shine through us. We've just put all these blocks in the way, all these veils of what we think are who we are and what we have to do and be. If we can start removing those veils, that light shines through. That breeze fills our sails, and it helps take us along our journey back home to God. And that's what we all want to do. And that's what we do every day. But let's do it more consciously. And let's ask for God's help in that process. And we will all get there together. Let's take a moment.
There are these words from Whispers from Eternity that Nivritti selected. Make us transparent that thy light might shine through us unimpeded. The sunbeams of thy love shine equally on all the members of thy cosmic family, whether prophet, hero, villain, tiny moth, or me. It is our own fault if we make ourselves opaque by our own mental and emotional dullness. Teach us to wipe away the dirt of error from the windows of our understanding. Our arms are weak for the task, owing to our long inner spiritual resistance. O Master Cleanser, lend power to our efforts, that we may wipe away every last spot that clings to our minds, obscuring our transparency and preventing free entry to thy light. O make us fully clean again, invisible in our egos, because transmitting only visions of thy beauty, which lies within us.